Welcome to the Thriving Outside the Box podcast. Join me, Dr. Kimberly Grocher, a licensed psychotherapist, executive coach, and yoga and mindfulness meditation teacher, as I shed light on the stories of leaders and entrepreneurs across industries who not only dared to create their own path in their careers, businesses, and lives, but have found a way to do it while thriving mentally, physically, and spiritually. I hope you walk away with the inspiration to do the same. So welcome to another episode of Thriving Outside the Box. I'm so excited to be with you all again. I am Dr. Kimberly Grocher, your host, and I'm very excited to welcome my guest today, Melanie Ryan, who is Melanie, you tell the people who you are, because you are more than just a psychotherapist.
I am. Well, I just want to say thank you first for inviting me on your show and say hello to everyone out there who's listening. So it's so funny, what do we say after I am? It's, that's a question to really contemplate. Like, who am I? And what I do is I help people discover who they really are. I am. I've changed what comes after I am so many times, and it's like, well, who am I now? Okay, so today I am Melanie Ryan. I've been a psychotherapist for 30 years. I've known that I've wanted to be a psychotherapist since I was 15 years old. I've never done anything else besides psychology, philosophy. I just was born to do this. And I'm sure about that. And I feel very fortunate that I have always known who I am and what I'm supposed to be doing. Now, there's been parts of me that I was not aware of that I've learned about and I've evolved and changed and transformed. But I always knew I wanted to help people. Mm-hmm. So I've been doing it for 30 years. I'm 55 now. And so since I was 25, which I feel like I was a baby, I graduated from social work school. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. And I got a dual concentration, a dual master's in social work, clinical social work, and social work research, because I've always loved to dig, to research things, to build the knowledge base, right? So I started off with that, and my path became very spiritual. And in a nutshell, I have formulated what I call like my own recipe for healing and transformation, which is called the Golden Shadow Method. The Golden Shadow Method involves a lot of ancient wisdom. It's the wisdom of our ancestors, of the Buddhists, and also the shamans, and the work that Carl Jung brought forward when he coined the term the shadow, which is the unconscious. And so a lot of people talk about outer space, right? Oh, what's going on Mars and what's going on the moon and what's out there? So what's out there is actually within us. We have a whole universe inside of us. And so when I was thinking about how I was going to introduce myself, I was like, well, I'm an astronaut of inner space.
An astronaut of inner space. I have not heard that before. Yeah, I have a visual. Yeah.
So I travel within and I take people within. And, psychology, if you think about the origins of psychology, the word psyche, which means unconscious, comes from Greek mythology. Psyche was a Greek goddess that translates into spirit or soul. Mm-hmm. And that's the root word of psychology. Ology is the study of. Mm-hmm. So what are we doing as psychologists or in psychology? We are studying the soul. And what is the soul? It's infinite. We are infinite. We are the universe. We are energetic spiritual beings. And so that is what I do. I'm an astronaut of inner space. I guide people on a journey to go within.
That sounds like more than what you do. In the words of Dara Williams, a Dharma teacher, that is who you be.
That is who I be.
Yes.
I love that.
Yes. So let me ask you, I want to go back for a second to when you were 15. How did you know? Like, what were the signs? What were the indicators that I'm supposed to be a therapist? I'm supposed to be studying the psyche, studying the soul.
It was a knowing.
Mm-hmm.
I had a cousin who was a psychologist, and he worked at a hospital in New York. And he asked me one time, this was my mom's side. My mom's side is Jewish. My father's side was Catholic, and I ended up being a Buddhist. But it was over a Jewish holiday. We're all sitting around, a lot of family. We always had a big family. It was always amazing. And he sat next to me because he was a psychologist. And he's like, so Melanie, what do you think you want to do? And I said, I think I want to do what you do. And, and he actually worked a lot with people who were suicidal, which I didn't particularly want to do that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew I wanted to help people. I was really fascinated with criminals.
Mm-hmm.
Like Silence of the Lambs was like one of my favorite movies. I was like super interested in like, how did Charles Manson get to be that way? Like what happened there?
Mm-hmm.
What happened to the brain? So that was like my research mind was like brain and behavior. But I kind of wanted to study the dark side. I believe that everyone was good. And I got made fun of for that. Like in my family, they were, oh, Melanie, you're so naive. And I just really believed that everyone was good. And I couldn't accept, that there was such evil in the world. And I wanted to understand how evil came into the world. And so I almost went into a different career where I wanted to kind of be like CSI, like crime scene investigated, and, I love that show. And I was really into forensic psychology, and I almost went that path.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up not getting into the college that I wanted to get into because I wasn't really a classroom type student. I'm more of like an outdoor, experiential, I learned through my body. I learned through experience and through oral tradition. So I ended up, going to school for psychology. And then I really didn't want to go for another 4 years to get my PhD. So I took a shortcut and did the social work thing. And then I, studied yoga because of my own anxiety. And I suffered tremendously from panic attacks. And I also became an addiction specialist. I was a CASAC, they call it, Certified Alcohol and Substance Abuse Counselor. And I worked in hospitals and I worked in rehabs, and they paid for me to get my addiction certification. I became a specialist for like 20 years in that area. And, with addiction, there's always, on the treatment plan, there's always a spiritual goal.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I worked at a hospital and my supervisor asked me, and I was 25 at the time, just out of social work school, just graduating. Actually, maybe a little bit. I think I graduated when I was 22 because I'm young. I started school early. He asked me about my own spirituality because I couldn't help other people with their spiritual goals if I didn't have. And I just was like, yeah, I had no spirituality. And so for my own personal healing, I started going to workshops and, just kind of exploring what was out there, and yoga, wasn't really quite popular yet, but I was going to spiritual retreat places where yoga was happening. And so I found a yoga teacher who was actually teaching with a Tibetan Buddhist nun. And it spoke to me, and I ended up studying to become a yoga teacher. And I got my 200-hour certification in 2005. So that's 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was not hitting the scene yet among therapists. And so I was, doing things that I was afraid that I was going to be judged for doing. Like I remember when I opened my private practice in 2005, I started my private practice, left working for the hospitals and schools and rehab centers. And I kind of changed a lot of the different places that I worked at. And I worked at really, I really was wanting to study the dark side. Like I worked at like residential rehabs, where children were taken away from their families and serious abuse and serious drug use. Like I flirted with the dark side a lot. And I hung out in areas where drive-by shootings. One of my social work internships was in Yonkers, New York, working around the corner from where the son of Sam had lived. Son of Sam, the serial murderer. And there were drive-by shootings. And here I am. I'm a white girl from White Plains. And I am, in a neighborhood where it's like a subsidized building with, mothers and babies and, just the amount of abuse that was going on there. It was hell. It was hell on earth. And I wanted it. I wanted to see what life was like on the dark side, because I wanted to become a really good therapist. I wanted to be able to hold people's hands. And I also think I wanted to face my own darkness, So as a result of my own trauma growing up, my family did not have money. My parents had me and my sister. I have an older sister. When they were very young, they were 19, 20. Very unstable. They separated when I was 2. They moved around a lot. I was at a different school every year. So I suffered from a lot of panic attacks. And when I was teaching, these groups at hospitals, it was very challenging to get in front of groups or speak at team meetings in front of other doctors and present cases. I would have these full-on panic attacks. So I ended up turning to yoga because it was not part of my path to take any pharmaceuticals, even though, many people benefit from them. I believe it should be a short-term thing because I do believe, and I have in my practice developed a method that really does heal trauma, heals PTSD and complex PTSD. But the mainstream doesn't have these approaches yet. And so people are kind of stuck with what is out there. But for me, it was a spiritual healing. And it started with yoga. I didn't want to take medication. And then yoga led me into Buddhism and shamanism. And that was very outside the box.
Yeah.
And shamanism is still outside the box.
Yeah.
So what I was doing 20 years ago, it took a lot for me to put that on my business card to say proudly that I was a yoga teacher. And then I started to teach meditation to other therapists. So I was kind of having to be brave, and to be outside the box takes bravery. When I was contemplating what it means to be outside the box, right? It's the name of your podcast. I was like, well, what is the box?
What is the box?
What is the box? And what is the box for you might not be the box for me.
Right.
Right? Because for me, outside the box right now, where I'm going with my spiritual practice now 20 years later, is I'm studying to be a psychic medium. That's outside the box for me. I'm like, because my son died suddenly a year and a half ago. And a lot of people heal from that kind of loss by learning to connect with them in the spirit world. And so I've always taught people, as part of the golden shadow, it's your true nature to be psychic. We all have intuition. We all have a gut instinct. That is your intuition. But what we don't realize is how powerful we are, and that becoming psychic, like owning that power, inviting that door to open, is for me right now, stepping outside the box, right? I'm like, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to open this door? Because I really don't want all these dead people coming in, and talking to me. I really only want to talk to my son, but I have no idea what's going to happen. I really don't. And that's why we're constantly evolving. So my box is different than your box. And when I was contemplating outside the box to me is like Carl Jung coined the term shadow work, and it's a path of discovering your true nature. It's a path of individuation, right? It's discovering who you really are. And if we actually knew who we really are, how powerful we are, it is frightening. It does scare us, right? So he would say the box is this illusion. And Buddhists would say this too, and probably shamans, all the lineages that I work with, they would say that we're playing small when we're inside the box, right? We're following the rules. We're conditioned, right? When we're young and we're in survival mode because we're not financially independent yet, we have to be who other people want us to be in order to survive, right? I better make mommy happy or daddy happy because they provide a roof over my head and they put food on my plate.
Mm-hmm.
So it is purely out of survival that we become these people pleasers. We go to school and the teacher says, oh no, you got to color in the lines. But I don't want to color in the lines. No, you have to color in the lines.
That's what's pretty. That's what's nice.
Yeah, but it's like already conditioning us how to follow these rules and how to be in this box.
Yes.
So everything that I do, everything that Carl Jung did, everything that the Buddha taught, everything that the shamans taught, all the things that I wrap up into the Golden Shadow Method is all about breaking out of that box, is about liberation. So I liberated myself naturally. I never took any medications. I did take homeopathy, which is all natural. And I still actually have to take a homeopathic remedy for grief for my son, and I don't know what I would do without it. It's probably saved my life. But there are a lot of medicines that are outside the box, right? That mainstream, doesn't give you access to or advertise it, right? It's kind of kept hidden in what I call the golden shadow. Mm-hmm. There's all these positive, amazing, powerful things hidden in the golden shadow. And they are in our culture. There's positive things hidden in the culture, and there's positive things hidden within us, and there's positive things that got buried from our ancestors. So my path, going back to what you were saying, was stepping out of the box onto the spiritual path. And that is really infinite. And like I said, I'm still evolving. And I'm becoming things, I'm actually just allowing what's already in there to shine, because I already was psychic. I was born psychic. You were too. And so was everyone else. But saying yes to that, owning the golden shadow, I say, and taking responsibility and being ready to receive all of that ancient wisdom and to reach my full potential. I teach people how to reach their full potential, but I'm still evolving as a human being myself.
Yeah. And
you have to do it with fear. No one is fearless. If someone tells you they don't have fear, they're right.
That was going to be my next question to you, right? Because first of all, thank you for sharing so much of your journey, really being vulnerable. And this is not our first conversation, by the way, but Melanie is great. And I'm still learning things about you even as we talk now. But one of the things I appreciate most about you is your vulnerability and your ability to be real and upfront with this is what I do, but also these are still the things I'm navigating and the things I'm struggling. It's not all figured out and it doesn't have to be. For somebody that's listening, that's really wanting to, I want to create my own path. I want to do this thing that is very different for me or different than where I'm coming from. What were the things that helped you really lean into bravery or find bravery or get past the judgments? Because I'm sure there was some judgments as psychotherapists. Listen, let's be honest. As much as we help other people to learn to be non-judgmental, we can be very judgmental as an industry of each other. So how did you cultivate the courage and the strength to find bravery, move beyond the judgment around you, all those things that helped you not be fearless, but take your steps?
Yeah, to become authentic. Mm-hmm. And that's our goal in life for all of us, is to become authentic. And that is a path that requires facing yourself and facing your fears. So my path really started with Buddhism and shamanism. And so Buddhists love to talk about two things, fear and death. And actually, if you think about it, death is probably the biggest thing that we're afraid of. Mm-hmm. And the thing that we don't talk about, right? So I sat on my meditation cushion and learned how to be with myself and face my fear and face all of my own inner judgments and my perfectionism and all of the things that were inside of me that I say come from the dark shadow, right? All of my fears of moving away from my family of origin and their patterns and their fears that I inherited. I took on my family's fears. I let that stop me and go to certain places in the world. Like I really wanted to go to Africa right after I graduated from social work school. I wanted to join the Peace Corps for 4 years and I wanted to go to Africa. And I've always been called to Africa. I've yet to go. I'm going to get there. And, talk about shamanism, Africa is definitely a place to go check out for shamanism. So I inherited a lot of fears, and on my meditation cushion and in the Shambhala tradition in which I studied and then became authorized to teach, I became a Buddhist meditation teacher. It took 15 years, nearly 15 years. You work very closely with a meditation instructor, and they're kind of like your analyst, that in Carl Jung's lineage, they point out your blind spots. They point out like how to help you get over your obstacles, which fear is an obstacle. Mm-hmm. Limiting thoughts, limiting beliefs, negative thought patterns, what really belongs to you and what belongs to maybe my mother or my father or my sister, right? So what I teach is exactly coming from my own life experience. I'm sharing what worked for me. And I feel like because I'm a human being, and if it worked for me, it can work for you. I've had a lot of trauma growing up. I've had all the kinds of trauma, abandonment, sexual assault, physical abuse, child of an alcoholic, I said abandoned. I was going to say that again. Obviously, that's still an issue. So, I'm being real and I'm saying, try this, right? And so in Buddhism, there's Dharma, there's books to read, and then there's the practice, and it's doing both. And I do that with people. In the Golden Shadow method, there's 3 pillars. One is Jung in the Shadow, where we talk about Jung's concepts and his ways of going into the unconscious. Mm-hmm. And then Buddha in the Shadow, we use the Buddhist techniques of going into the unconscious. Mm-hmm. And then Shaman in the Shadow, we use the shaman's techniques of going into the unconscious. And in shamanism, you deal with fear in a very different way. You actually work with power animals and spiritual guides. And these are all energies and archetypes that are floating around in your unconscious that are there to help you to reclaim lost power. Because we give our power away. When we're little, we give our power away. Again, it's for survival. Mm-hmm. Every time you said yes when you really wanted to say no, you're giving your power away, right? So we take our power back by starting to work with our power animals. So it's a very eclectic approach that I use. Mm-hmm. And so I worked it together. It was like a weaving. I did Buddhism and shamanism side by side. I've always believed in mentors. I see psychotherapists as mentors, but I've also had Buddhist teachers. I've had shamanic teachers. I've had metaphysical mentors, Jungian mentors. And I mean, when I was a mess, I had probably like 5 or 6 mentors around me. And I went to each one for something different because that was my path. My path is, I was called to a lot of different spiritual traditions, and that's just my karma. That's from within my soul, why I want to see all of it. I see all of it, I research all of it, and I see how it all intersects.
I love what you're doing. I just have to say, I love what you're doing. I mean, not only does it resonate, right, but also listening to you, I'm seeing how all these different pieces of you have come into play. Right? So your own grief and loss journey, your own lived experience with trauma, your intuitiveness into, knowing that you're drawn to spirituality, knowing that you're drawn to research, right? Like, because there's the research in here too.
Yeah.
Coming up with your own model and your own framework.
And that was hard. It was hard for me to go my own way. I ended up having like a falling out with a couple of teachers, which for me was devastating, but it was like something was happening where, some people say shift happens.
Yes.
Right? Instead of SHIT. Shift, SHIFT. You're being shifted. So when you're having a falling out and it feels devastating and there's a breakup, right? You are being shifted. The universe is always, I believe the universe always has your back. I believe your soul already knows what's coming because time is an illusion. Time and space are an illusion. This is more like metaphysics, quantum physics, shamanism. Science and spirituality really do start to intersect as well. Next year, my books will start to talk about that. But, I was being shifted. And when that breakup happened, I was alone and I started meditating and asking the universe, like, what am I supposed to be doing now? And I had already started writing chapters on Buddhism, chapters on shamanism. So this was in 2019. I had the fallout. And so during the pandemic, I ended up writing the Golden Shadow Method. And I launched it at the end of that year. And what ended up coming in was, so I had the shaman part written, I had the Buddha part written. I had a dream about Carl Jung. And he was sitting in a garden and he had me come sit next to him. And he was like congratulating me for the work that I've done. And he said, and so if you're going to write a book on the shadow, hello, what about me? And I had dabbled in Jungian psychology. It'd always been fascinating. But, the difference between Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud was Carl Jung said the unconscious was a spiritual place. He was a soul doctor. He's known as the soul doctor, right? So he had studied with shamans and Buddhists. So he knew he was an astronaut of inner space, right? So he was going in and journeying into the soul as well through his active imagination, projection, archetypes, myths, dreams, right? All of that. Those were his ways of going into the unconscious. I really feel like as a culture in the United States, I've been to the Far East. After my son passed, I wanted to go to 2 countries. One was Scotland, where the first Buddhist monastery opened up. Founded by the teacher of the lineage that I'm authorized to be a Buddhist teacher in, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. He was a Tibetan monk that escaped Tibet when China invaded in the 1950s. And he brought Buddhism, he brought mindfulness to the West. So in Scotland, there's the first monastery called Samyeling, and I went there. And for whatever reason, I still don't totally know yet. I had to go to Bhutan and I had to go to Scotland. And Bhutan is an enlightened society. I mean, what a beautiful country. The people are sweet, beautiful, respectful, compassionate. They don't know what it's like to work as an individual person. They are so community oriented. And we have a serious breakdown in our culture here in America where we are very isolated and families are falling apart and communities are falling apart. And Bhutan is a 95% Vajrayana Buddhist country. Vajrayana Buddhism is one of the wheels of Buddhism, and it's an old aspect of Buddhism. And so they every day, are practicing meditation. They're practicing compassion and doing the inner work. They're going in. They're studying themselves. They're looking at their own aggression. They're looking at their fear. They're looking at death. Actually, Bhutan is known as the happiest country in the world, and their secret is that they contemplate death for 5 minutes every day.
So what was coming up for me as I heard you say this, and this is also something very different about the West, I think, because there is so much emphasis on the individual person, that going in is often the navel gazing that we talk about, right? Like you're just focused on yourself. You're just focused on yourself. And I think it's so important to point out what you're pointing out, that in these collective societies, in these societies that really center community, there still is this self-study, but it's also for the greater good of the
Yes,
collective.
exactly. That's what shadow work is.
Yep.
And Buddhism is part of the Golden Shadow Method because Buddhism is teaching you to look at your shadow. But the main concept is we're all golden Buddhas. We're all a diamond inside, an indestructible diamond. That's the light. That is the essence of who we are, which goes back to what I was saying when I was 15 years old. I believed that we're all good. We are good. It's not naive. It's who we truly are. We are a divine spark, right? And so when we look at each other as that, as children, where we honor the wisdom, that divine wisdom that's inside that they're born with, when we honor their creativity that they're born with, when we honor their soul's purpose that they're born with, right? We don't have to live in fear of like, oh my God, what's going to happen to my child? Are they going to be, okay? Like trusting, I homeschooled my son and I used the Golden Shadow Method with him and he studied it actually. And he was already working as a second degree black belt as an instructor at his Taekwondo dojang. He was there. He was volunteering his time and he was always there, and we supported what came natural. So it's our true nature. It's like seeing the gold in each one of us. And they do that in Bhutan. When you arrive, it's like, first of all, the most gorgeous airport I've ever seen in the world. It's all local artists. Everything is built by hand, and then everything is painted by hand. And the painting on the building of the airport was like, the tiger, the dragon, and then these gorgeous flowers that are outlined in gold. And there was always gold because that symbolizes our gold, our golden light inside of us. And it's not to say that we don't have a dark side. We all do. But to not be ashamed of that and I started teaching my son to meditate when he was, not even 3 years old. He sat on my lap as an infant. It was just part of our culture to create an enlightened society within our home, to have consciousness in our home, right? And so to have a lifestyle, I think, I personally feel like my soul is more Asian than anything else,
Mm-hmm.
Like I just never really felt like I fit into the American culture. I don't like the busyness. My nervous system, I just moved to the mountains, to get away from it all. Like, some people love the city. I don't. I love to go visit and then I love to leave. I'll go for a day, go see a Broadway show or something, but it's not in my nature, to want to be overstimulated like that, Yeah. So we are all golden Buddhas.
Melanie, thank you so much for sharing your journey, for sharing your work. I always like to ask, well, I don't always ask this question, but I do sometimes, and I really like to. Is there a question that you wished I had asked you or that you would like me to ask you?
I'm looking at my notes of what I wrote. I just want to say that what I feel is a radical movement right now, what is like revolutionary, is for us here in America to look within ourselves. There's so much distraction. There's so much distraction.
Mm-hmm.
The phone is really, it's just, out of control. right? The amount of information and things and the ways that we can plug into the negativity. To look within ourselves for the good and to also look into other people's eyes and see the good. That's outside the box for me, especially even in our industry where it's like, okay, let me get my DSM and let me diagnose you. Right? And that becomes part of someone's identity.
Yeah.
Of what comes after I am. I am ADHD. I am bipolar. I am this, or that, right? And that has such power over our psyche. And we are not that. Again, we're a golden Buddha. We are a divine spark. We are amazing, great, intuitive, powerful, creative, loving beings. And when we focus on that, right? Whatever we focus on grows.
Yep.
So yes, we work on our traumas and our dramas and we transmute that darkness and we own that with no shame or judgment. But we have to start looking at our true nature, who we really are as golden Buddhas and divine sparks of light and love. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Please tell the listeners where they can find you and also how people can connect with the work that you're doing.
I'm actually in a little bit of a transition right now. Right now, my website for me and my husband, because he's a healer and he does this work as well, although he teaches wilderness skills like primitive living and connecting to the earth, and he's a pain specialist who does body work. So we have a website called ancientwisdomtoday.com, and I'm on there. But I just started a new website, goldenshadowmethod.com. And because there's so much with the Golden Shadow Method, it's expanding that I wanted to start a website just for that, because we do retreats, like we're doing a retreat to Greece, June of 2026. We want to have people immerse. So I work with people individually online, and some people do the Golden Shadow Method with me online privately. And then we are looking to have more people come together on our land here. We live in northern Georgia in the mountains, in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And we will be opening up our land. We have 6 acres here, and we might have more by the time this launches. But, I'm trained in vision questing from the Apache lineage of Grandfather Stalking Wolf. So vision quests, deep personal transformational healing retreats here on the land, but also, international retreats. We take people to Greece where we study mythology, holistic health, and being up in the mountains in Greece on the Aegean Sea, where the mountains meet the sea, and it's so beautiful. I rent an organic farm this will be my 5th time. So I've been doing this for a little while now. I also do dream incubation, which that's an ancient Greek healing art. It's kind of shamanic also. But there's more on the website. But that's really what I'm doing. And yes, I'm teaching at the Omega Institute, the Golden Shadow Method, for 5 days. And in 2026, I don't know, if it'll be a weekend thing or another 5-day thing. We'll see, what happens. But if you're looking for a retreat in person and you really want to unplug and you really want to go deep and transform, definitely I'm interested in people who are wanting to do that work. And then if you're in Europe or if you're on the West Coast and you can't get here, I work online. And so you do get certified in the Golden Shadow Method. So as for other psychotherapists, if you want to start to be able to apply this method with your clients, especially my work on triggers, I have a Transmuting Triggers book coming out that is again, talking about trauma and PTSD, it really is healing people, really healing people. They don't need medication anymore. They don't have PTSD symptoms anymore. No nightmares, no anxiety, coming off all the medications. It also involves some nutrition therapy because that's usually part of the issue as well. But it's a very spiritual approach to working with triggers. So I do that online and in person as well. And I'm sorry, I know this is a long answer.
No, this is great. This is great. This is resource. This is information. So yeah.
So I'm on social media. You can find me on Instagram, golden.shadow.method, and also Ancient Wisdom Today. And the same thing on Facebook, Golden Shadow Method, Ancient Wisdom Today. Those are the things, that you can search for. My Melanie Ryan page, you can also follow me there. Lots of options to find me. I try and put myself out there as much as I can. And I do love photography and videography. It's one of my creativity, expressing itself. I like to put some things out there on social media that are fun to watch and listen to.
Thank you again, Melanie. I hope everyone checks out her information if it resonated with you. And I hope that you all got some gems that may inspire you on how to use bravery, find bravery, do things being fearful, really owning your true nature and being real and authentic about who you really are as you navigate your journey outside the box.